Hello and welcome back to a special edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, February 15th. It's a great pleasure to be joined here in our studio by the two candidates who are running for the three-year seat on the Manchester Select Board. That would mean the current member, Ivan Beattie. He's an incumbent. He's been on the Select Board since 1984, has been the chairman of the board since 1986. Before that, he was a member of the town's planning commission and also owns and runs the East of Equinox Farm in Manchester, a Morgan horse breeding farm. It is also great to have with us today Megan Amundson, who is the challenger for that three-year seat. She runs a consulting firm based in Manchester that specializes in helping nonprofit organizations with fundraising, and she's also currently a member of the town's planning commission. So, Megan, Ivan, thank you both for making the time for this conversation today. Really appreciate that. And good to have you both here, and I'm sure the voters and viewers will learn a lot over the next half hour or so that we'll be discussing some of the issues in town and the reasons why you're running, which is the perfect starting point, I guess. Megan, let's start with you. What prompted you to throw your hat in the ring for this race, and why are you running?
Well, thanks for having us, Andrew. It's nice to have an opportunity actually to chat about these issues together and for the voters. I'm running because I think we need some new voice and new perspective on the select board. The town has changed pretty significantly, even just over the last few years, which is, in the big scheme of things, is a lot of change in a really short period of time. You know, we have more residents, our commercial base is shifting, our tourism is shifting, and I don't see the town keeping up with the needs of the community. And I think that we need more voice and more perspective, being part of defining these challenges and figuring out these problems. So I'm running to be part of that. And, you know, Ivan has been such a staunch leader of this community for so long. Actually, Ivan, to paraphrase you, I think Ivan has, done reasonably well for our community. But anytime you've had someone at the helm for 39 years, we should probably take a look at that. Now, Ivan was saying that about John O'Keefe, our former town manager, but I think that's true kind of throughout our town government. We should be taking a look at all of our government services, all of the people who are serving there. If they've been serving for a really long time, perhaps we need some new perspective there. Okay.
Well, Ivan, your turn. Why are you continuing to seek another term on the select board?
Well, that's a good question, Andrew. And first of all, I'd like to start out by thanking Megan for throwing her hat into the ring. I think there should be a choice for every office that's being considered in the election this year. And I'm really happy that I have someone running against me, and I mean that. And I wish there was a choice on every single layer. I have been here for a long time. Actually, my family's been in Manchester for 7 generations. 6 generations of my family have graduated from Burr and Burton. I have spent much of my adult life in local government. One thing that we didn't talk about was my service on the Board of Civil Authority before on the select board, but helping run elections and that sort of thing. I have seen the town government grow from a town manager that was really just the road foreman in Oakley Porter. We had a town clerk, Clara May Hemingway, and we had a town treasurer in Harold Wizzle. And then there was a road crew comprised of 6 people, including Dave Bashee and Allie Hart, and of course we had Betty Tobin in the office. Everything else was volunteer at that point, and the town certainly has grown since I was a youngster, and town government has grown along with it. And I think we have efficiently met the needs of the community in the time that I've served on the board, and at some point I could list some of the things that the town has done in reaction to growth or to even help with that growth. But I feel that we've been able to handle that challenge efficiently and in an affordable manner, and that's always the underscore of everything. And the one thing I want to say is that I do realize that the demand for government services is way different than it was when I was a child. The municipality has had to take on a lot more concerns. We didn't have a water company. We didn't have a sewer plant. The water company was privately owned. We purchased that in the early 80s. We have grown as a community, and the level of service that we have provided has grown along with it. And I think we've met that challenge, and have sometimes even led that challenge. But I thank everyone for their support in the past. Hopefully you think I'm still, my historical perspective will serve the town well in the future, and I'm really happy to be able to continue my service to the town.
All right. Well, let's dive in then to some of the questions and issues that are facing voters and here in the town currently. Let's start with the question around housing, which seems to be the number one issue. One hears about that constantly. There's a real lack of affordable housing and rental apartments available for folks. So, Megan, again, let me go back to you then. What thoughts do you have on how the town might, do something to improve the stock of available housing for low, middle income groups?
So there's no silver bullet on the housing crisis. That kind of is the challenge. If there was a quick fix, we would have fixed it by now. But there are a million little changes that we need to make to create an environment where we can have investment in housing. And it's part of why I sit on the Planning Commission, because a lot of that happens in zoning. And zoning can be the biggest barrier to building housing, to having housing. We have a lot of challenges right now, kind of a perfect storm of property values rising so fast. And even for as high as our rents are right now, they're not keeping up with property values. Like, I'm like a small time real estate investor. I'm a landlord. I have tenants and I have property. I would love to have more, but I can't make the numbers work, right? I'm not a developer. I'm not building any housing. I don't have any idea how developers are making the numbers work. But we do have to kind of smooth a way for people to be able to invest in rental housing. And it means having some regulatory certainty. If I want to buy a property that I want to, keep as a multifamily, or I want to turn into a multifamily, how many hoops do I need to jump through? How high is that risk for me investing in that? These are the kinds of questions that I think about sitting on the Planning Commission. How do we think about growth for this town? We have grown, and we're going to continue to grow. I think really seriously that Vermont is going to be a destination for climate refugees over the next couple decades. The growth is going to keep happening. And I want us to not hide behind the guise of, we need to keep our character, because that tends to speak for we don't want change. The change is coming, the change has happened. We actually need density, and we need density in our town core. We need density in those residential areas around the town core. And this is something that I'm looking at really seriously on the Planning Commission, is how do we build in density in a way that does keep the aesthetic character, but not the you buy big land when you come to Vermont character, because that's not going to be the reality for our town.
And your thoughts on that situation, Ivan?
It's funny, when I was on the Planning Commission, we had discussions about affordable housing, and one well-known member, who I won't name by name, said, well, Manchester has affordable housing. It's called Danby and Sunderland. And to a degree that was true and continues to be true, maybe not so much Sunderland anymore. But Manchester is a hub, provides service to the surrounding communities for employment. We have 10,000 jobs and just over 4,000 people. It provides shopping, goods and services, entertainment, checks all the boxes as a regional hub. And to a certain degree, and we'll talk about jobs a little bit, we talk about workforce housing, and that there's a tremendous need for that throughout the country. This is not a Manchester issue, it's not a Vermont issue, it's not a New England issue, it's nationwide. And it's going to become more and more difficult to address that. I think all government's role in that is to try to make the process easy to navigate, recognize, like Megan said, where the the regulations could identify places where we could make it easier to affordably build these units, but the actual building of the units comes from the private sector. And Manchester's not in a position to incentivize as some other larger communities or the state might be. So the only advantage that we can give developers is through trying to make, through density and other things, to make the process more affordable. But that development will come from the private sector. That's where the investment comes from. And it only happens unless there's some kind of very large program that incentivizes people to invest. It's got to be productive financially for the developers. So it's a challenge. Manchester needs to stay abreast of what's happening around the country to try to address these issues. To a large degree, a lot of the burden of that falls on the Planning Commission, but the Select Board needs to be aware, needs to be an effective partner with the Planning Commission, and be able to speak with state and federal officials as to how to facilitate affordable housing. I'll say workforce housing, because that's really what we're talking about here.
We should probably define that, because I think most people don't know the difference. But that affordable housing is below market rate housing. It is subsidized in some way by government. Workforce housing is for people who make too much to afford the subsidized housing. That's kind of the next level. So this is housing that is less expensive, but it's still market rate. And I'll add that we actually do need to be investing in infrastructure around this as a town. Like, yes, we need to smooth some regulatory pathways for density, but we need to be investing in water and sewer as well, because that is what allows for us to have that density that we need. So thinking about, a vision for where does that density happen, where will we need to make these investments, and starting to plan that out, because those investments are big. We're expanding, sewer right now. I've been listening to the conversations. These are big chunks of money. And it takes time for us to figure out where are other pots of money that we can tap into. How are we paying for this? How are we bonding this? And we do need to be planning this out 10 years out. Like, we know we want water and sewer, down to where the airport is. We know we want water. I have lots of visions of where I wish we were putting water and sewer through town, but that's what will actually allow us to have density, is to have that kind of infrastructure in place, which does fall to the Select Board. Well, it falls to the town to really come together and create a vision together, but the Select Board really has to put that into a budget and says, this is our plan for how we get that done. And I think we need to be really proactive about that, because the problem's not going away. The problem's only going to get bigger. We hear about it a lot now. A lot of more families are living on the margins since COVID. We have a lot more need for a lot of services that our town provides. So we need to be thinking about what are the things only town government does that our town should be investing in. Water, sewers, definitely at the top of the list for me. These are the kinds of things that we need to be investing in for our town.
Let me jump in here and ask you both, what are your thoughts about the bill that Representative Seth Bongartz has helped to write up in the legislature that is being discussed up there now? That would require that there be multifamily dwellings and accessory dwelling units allowed in any residential zoning district, and would require multifamily homes with up to 4 units be allowed in any district that is served by municipal water and sewer. On its face, it would seem like this is Montpelier saying, this is what you need to do, towns, and you couldn't write zoning regulations that would be, not in keeping with that. And I guess, Ivan, over to you first.
Okay.
Your thoughts on that bill? Do you think that's a good idea for Manchester?
I can remember back when Seth was involved in the Agency of Natural Resources, and was in Montpelier, and him saying specifically to me, I think we try to do too much with zoning. That we're trying to use zoning as a way to regulate the economy and other aspects. And I think to a point, he had a good point. To make a sweeping change like that could have an impact on people's visions of what their Vermont life would be. To make it mandatory to be part of a multi-housing structure, all centralized. I'm going to get back to something Megan said earlier, and I do really like the feel of Manchester as it's. I think we're very cosmopolitan. We can offer almost anything that an urban environment can offer, but at the same time, it's a small town. It's a very narrow path that we walk. And I think one of the things that we'll get back to the election. One of the things that makes Manchester such a great place is that we still have a town meeting where people can go and discuss the issues that are on the agenda, influence the other people that are there to maybe change their vote, amend it so maybe it meets everybody's needs, and then have it either pass or fail based on that input from the people of the town. And there's been a big push lately to try to move everything to Australian ballot, and actually we've done that over the last couple of years because of COVID. And what that eliminates is the ability, all you can say is yes or no. You can't tell the people that are putting it together for you why you voted no or why you voted yes. You can't try to influence anybody else's vote. I'm getting way off the topic, but and you can't amend it. So it's just one of those little things that keeps that small town feel where people can get together. And I hope people attend town meeting on March. You'll have to tell me what the date is, but thank you. It's one of the things that we have that allows us to continue to be the great place that Manchester's been throughout history. But getting back to the question at hand, it's those kind of things. And I think by putting too much pressure on trying to steer growth in a very specific direction would have adverse influences on other aspects of the quality of life here. Could have.
Your thoughts on that, Bill?
I don't think the bill goes far enough. I'll be honest, I've worked in affordable housing policy in the couple decades I've worked in political advocacy, and I think we need actually more sweeping change because zoning does get in the way of us meeting the needs of our residents. We're not even meeting the needs of our businesses to be able to be this regional hub. And I don't think that's sustainable for us. I think we need solutions. And if we're going to drag our feet on solutions, I think the state should step in. And I think the state should say, hey, you put water and sewer here. Guess what? You signaled density. Now we're going to let people do it. And the thing is, so few people are actually going to be able to take advantage of this law. It's not going to have sweeping change in what our downtown or our town core looks like, but it's going to be one of those factors that chips away at the housing problem. We're going to get an accessory dwelling unit here. We're going to get a 2-family over there, right? It's going to be adding units bit by bit. We still need some large developments. I won't lie, we need some large housing developments to really get at this problem. But even if we had, which is nowhere on the agenda, like a 400-unit apartment building going, and we're not. Nobody worry, we're not. It still wouldn't meet our needs. So I think every little bit helps and gets us closer to it. But as somebody who's looking to make investments in long-term rental housing in the town of Manchester, man, our zoning really gets in the way of me being able to do that. I run into boundary in barriers left and right to add 1 unit. And we need that 1 unit. And it's kind of ridiculous that it should be that hard and that the risk should be so high for someone like me. I'm not sitting on piles of money to invest in real estate. All of my money's financed. I have to pay those loans back. But man, it's hard. It's really hard. So make it easier for people like me to provide housing for the people who want to live there.
Yeah, could I respond?
Sure.
I just, something that Megan mentioned about the state should be stepping in and doing this. The state stepped in with our school system, and I don't think it improved. Certainly for a town like Manchester, which is very education oriented and willing to fund that, as are most of the surrounding communities. It kind of brings the best down a little bit so that we get equity throughout the state. And I think we should be looking at, speaking about schools, the excellence that we have here in Manchester, especially at the secondary school level, and trying to emulate that throughout the state rather than trying to bring that down to match everybody else. And I worry about the same thing with other controls. I've experienced in my lifetime in going up and trying to institute a 1% local option tax. We were 10 years ahead of the state for that. And I'm not a big proponent of new taxes, but in Manchester, we had to provide an infrastructure to accommodate visitors to the town, mostly for our commercial sector. But the burden of paying for that fell on the backs of the property taxpayers, and many of those people didn't share in the golden eggs that were being produced by the business community. By instituting an option tax, it allowed the visitors to the town to be able to come in and contribute to the cost of providing that infrastructure to support that activity. And in doing so would lessen the burden on the property tax. It was a tough sell. Like I said, it took 10 years for us to do that, and to allow us the option of going forward with that. And I spent a lot of time in Montpelier, and those are the kind of initiatives that work the best, the ones that come from the bottom up, not from the top down. And what works for Manchester may not be the same as what works for the rest of the state. I think decisions should be made here as much as possible. And what needs to come from the higher levels of government is flexibility in allowing the local communities to make decisions for themselves, and then working with the larger structure to get the critical mass that it takes to move those ideas forward. So little other difference of opinion maybe.
Well, I don't actually think we differ in that. I think we have a lot of community members in Manchester who aren't part of the conversation. You talked about the benefit of town meeting, and I have to say I'm on the other side of that too, because there's a very privileged few who can take a day away from their responsibilities to engage in this conversation. And there are a lot of people who simply can't and then don't get voice in what our town does. And all those thousands of people who aren't at town meeting, who did vote for Australian ballot during the pandemic, those people deserve voice too. And I don't think that they're being heard in our government, because when I walk through town and I talk to people about housing, man, they want housing, and there are a lot of things that they are willing to compromise to get housing because it's so dire. But I don't know that we are actually having that conversation. I mean, it's a conversation that I hope the Planning Commission is certainly trying to initiate this year with a new town plan, and really trying to figure out with the housing task force kind of what are the options, bringing more people into the conversation. But I think so many people are left out of that conversation. I don't think we're truly doing a bottom-up government function either. And so if we aren't doing that, I do think Montpelier has a right to step in and say, okay, you're not actually doing what you need to be doing. And I don't know that we've stepped up to the plate for that. And I also, that town meeting, I really see it as our version of voter suppression. It is not equitable for our voters and for, members of our town to have say. It's a decision in my family between, who's going to be there, me or my husband. Like, we can't both be. Like, we have childcare, people who work, people who are sick, people who are disabled and not able to get there. Like, the millions of reasons why somebody can't be there and it's not an equitable experience for them. They can't participate in that conversation. I get the concept of it, but in practice, I think it's really problematic for us to be making decisions with a very privileged few.
You're not wrong. And in my time on the board, there was a Manchester student named Bjorn Kilburn that worked through the state system to get the law changed to allow town meeting to occur on something other than the Monday night before the Tuesday elections, because you had both the town and the school meeting, and it most often went way past midnight. And we alternated every year, and if the town went first, we got a lot of discussion on the town level. And then people were tired, and the school didn't get much discussion. And of course, if it were reversed, the town wouldn't get much discussion. And it was, in a very small way, an attempt to try to make it, to give some. I'm sorry about that. Make it possible for the get that shut down here. To make it possible for people to attend, and it needs to go a lot farther. I still think it's as a citizen in a free community, I still think it's people need to embrace that and become a part of it. But I do agree with you. It's a small percentage of the population that winds up making the decisions. However, they are informed, they're involved, and they get to hear the arguments, which we can't do in the voting booth. I'm not saying those people should be taken out of the conversation. I'd like to find a way to encourage them to participate on a higher level. That's all I got.
We have a few minutes left.
Before we have to run, and I just want to pivot away from the housing and all these other issues you've both been touching upon, which have been great. You've answered about 7 of the questions I had lined up here in the course of all this discussion, which is good. But Megan, I wanted to ask you, you've raised some concerns about the pedestrian infrastructure in town. And I just wondered if you could explain those and what your proposed solutions might be.
Yeah, I consider this part of our public safety infrastructure in town. So my family, I have a young daughter, she's 11. We walk around town. We made a conscious choice to purchase in town so that we could walk and bike around town. It's what we do for transportation. It's part of our, values in terms of how we impact the environment, and it's just actually what we enjoy. We actually became less happy people when we bought a car 5 years ago, and I had gone 17 years without a car. So walking is just core to kind of who we are, but it's terrifying to be walking around this town with a small child. And we moved here, my daughter was much younger, and it's really challenging to feel safe. And it's harder because with COVID, there were so many reasons why we didn't feel safe. So then to be, in a place where the thing that makes us happy, the thing that, helps us be whole, also makes us not feel safe is really challenging. So biking with her around town, walking with her around town is challenging. And now she's 11. We are trying to promote her independence. And we have her going off on her own, and that is terrifying as well because, we are never sure. And it's not a question of her because she's an incredibly responsible child, and so are her friends. But man, we have people who drive really interestingly through this town, and we live on a through street. People legitimately go 50 miles an hour up and down our street with no sidewalks. So I grew up in a small town in a rural state. Not this one, but I really find it interesting that we're not going to say how many decades ago when I was a child, in my small town, there was a couple thousand people larger than Manchester, but not by much. We have so much more professionalized infrastructure in our town. There were sidewalks on every street. I worked actually in high school for our town planning department. We had a town building inspector who was a plumbing inspector and did inspections around town. We were actually enforcing a building code in town. And so coming here, we don't have sidewalk infrastructure. We don't have safe biking infrastructure. But these are things we should have. We're much more crowded. We have a lot of cars coming through. And our tourism keeps shifting. We don't really even have stick season anymore. I was told that Bonnet and Maine never even shut down in November like they usually do. We just have a lot of traffic. And so I think that this is a public safety issue. Every parent, every neighbor on my street and on the adjoining streets that I talk to would be so excited to have this infrastructure for our town. And I think this is one of the things that we need to create a vision around. And it's something that the village and the town are looking, particularly around protected bike lanes going along 7A, about doing a study on what would that look like and how could we get that done. And I think we need to be very proactive in creating this investment because we've arrived at global warming. We've arrived at more people wanting to be here. More people are going to want to be here over the next couple decades. We have to start creating this infrastructure now because we will really be kicking ourselves in 20 years if we don't. It's for my kid. She's 11, but she's not going to be 11 forever. We need this for our community because I think as we grow, we're going to have a desperate need for getting around town safely and not just in a car.
I'll try to be brief. There has been significant development off the main beaten path over the last couple of decades, and Manchester was built linearly. It's not on a grid like many towns would be. It's mainly built based off the main thoroughfares through Manchester. and that's because of the topography of the area. But and because of that, the way that it's built, it's more difficult to put in sidewalks that would serve a threshold of individuals that would make it, that would justify the expense to the other people that are contributing to the cost of that. We have created more sidewalks. There was a period in time where we had kind of put a moratorium on sidewalk growth because we were having trouble maintaining the sidewalks that we had. We've gotten our arms around that now. Our sidewalks are in good shape and they're well maintained. We continue to receive requests from several areas where people would like to have sidewalks extended and have to balance the tremendous expense of that to the whole community for the benefit of a few. And I do understand that it's a safety issue, and I don't want to belittle it in any way. But as a community, there's a limit as to what we can do and where we can do it. And probably your street would be above several others on the list, but probably not at the top of the list because there's other even more densely populated areas that might benefit from that. So choices have to be made. Everybody has a wish list of what they'd like to have government do for them, but collectively, does it fit into the wish list of the community at large? And that's the balancing act that needs to be performed on a regular basis.
But I'm not sure we're asking the community what they actually want. And I think that's my pushback to your response is who wants it, who doesn't, we don't know. We haven't actually asked. We did a survey of our street and some of the adjoining areas, and I say we, my husband and I. My husband's a transportation professional. He could lay out a whole, staged plan of how we get sidewalks through town and how we get connectivity through town. And I think we have a lot more support than you might think we do, Ivan. And I think that it has a lot of other positive impacts around our economy and around our businesses. So I don't know that I could say that the town as a whole doesn't want this. I don't think we've asked them.
We really need to run very quickly, but I just had a couple of real quick questions I think would be great for voters to hear your views on. First of all, ARPA money. How much money is left in the ARPA bucket from what's already been committed, Ivan? And of that remaining balance, what is your thought on how the town might spend it?
We, during our budget process, became aware that there was, we'll say, that the account balances were lower in some of our funds than we expected they were. Some of that's because of performance of the stock market and other investments. Some of it's because there was a shift in how those monies were used in the operation of the town. But our accounts that were used to stabilize the property tax input into the budgetary process have been reduced to the point where we really shouldn't be invading those too much until we can figure out a way either to replenish them or go on without them. Faced with that challenge, we do have some ARPA money. Much of it is already allocated to certain things, and there are other items that are in the wings that may or may not come to fruition that would require the input of our ARPA money. $1 million isn't what it used to be. It doesn't go very far. Our plan is to obviously to use all that money. Initially, when it came in, it had a lot of challenges and restrictions as to how it could be used, but we've been able to work around that. Now there's not a lot of restriction as how it can be allocated. That decision can be made on a local level. The balance of what's left, I'm going to say probably 400,000 realistically. But some of that is already allocated to other projects, but we know of some of those projects where it's not going to be used. So I'll put it somewhere in that range.
Okay. Any thoughts on ARPA?
I mean, it wasn't a lot of money for us to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have a lot of infrastructure needs. My concern around the ARPA money is making sure that it goes to the infrastructure that only government can provide. So if there's infrastructure that is being requested of government that could be privately funded, absolutely it should not be ARPA money used or any of our other taxpayer dollars. We just have too many needs that only government can provide, because no matter how much money I have, I can't band together with my neighbors and build a sidewalk down my street. That is just not the authority that we have. So the infrastructure needs we have need to be very specific to government service only.
Last question. I just was wondering how, and this is sort of a very general, broad-ranging kind of question, but I just wondered, over the last 20 or 30 years, the town's economy has been driven in a lot of ways by the retail outlets and growth of that. That era may or may not be coming sort of to an end, or at least a ceiling. And I guess I just wondered what your thoughts were on what the right role of the town is in supporting the local business community. I mean, we have the Manchester Business Association. They get a certain amount of money each year, have been in recent years. Is that the limit to what the town should be doing, or should the town in some way or another do more than that to promote local businesses and then bring visitors to Manchester, and who then go to restaurants and stay in hotels and contribute to the financial well-being of the town? I'll start with you.
Start with me. Okay. Town has gone through a transition many times in my life here, and as I mentioned earlier, I've been here so far since I was born, and I hope to grow up here someday. But Manchester's economic basket has always been just one basket. It's always been that way. And there's a limit as to what we can do. When I first got on the select board, the push was to try to bring in industry, light, clean, environmental friendly, provide a lot of jobs. Well, everybody in the country is looking for that. We're not ideally situated. And that was during a time when industries were leaving Manchester, leaving Vermont, leaving the Northeast, leaving the country. And we were very successful in bringing Wallace Computer here against the wishes of the state of Vermont, which wanted to go to another town. And we were able locally, and we flew the chairman of the board at the time, which was before me, but I was on the board. We flew the chairman to Chicago to speak with Ted Demetrio, the principal of Wallace Computer, and ultimately they came here. And because they came here, now the mattress factory is here. And the same thing is true with the town. We need to position ourselves so that as economic viability presents itself, we're in a position for that to happen. And if we don't take advantage of those economic opportunities, for instance, retail outlets. I'm not a big retail outlet fan, but I was a proponent. And I think it was handled well, and it provided a lot of energy. And we were in kind of tough shape coming into that. And Manchester's always been magical. As each opportunity comes along, we can present something that people find wonderful, and they invest here. And if we take advantage of that particular period of time and that investment, it puts us in a position to be in a place to accept the next possibility when it arrives. We knew that retail outlet wasn't going to last, but it kept things going. It was profitable for a lot of people, and it gave us momentum to ride the next train that came along. And that doesn't come from us. That comes from investment from elsewhere. And as long as Manchester is an attractive place to live, an attractive place to invest your money, we're going to have that. We're going to continue to be in a position to take advantage of those opportunities. Momentum can go in either direction, and growth can go in either direction. There could be positive growth and negative growth. And if we take advantage of the growth opportunities, and I don't just mean growth in numbers, but in investment and in the community, we'll be in a position to take advantage of those opportunities as they arise in the future.
Okay, Megan, you get the last word on this.
Oh, I feel a little bit like a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. I think it does come back to our conversation around housing. I think we're going to strangle whatever our economy becomes next if we don't have the housing for people to actually be able to live and work here. And I think it comes back to, on the Planning Commission is some amount of regulatory certainty for businesses to understand when they are investing, how much is that risk and how much certainty do they have? Because the more certainty businesses have, the more likely they are to invest. So if we create more certainty, particularly with our zoning, because that's, the seat that I sit in right now, I think that helps. And there may be other ways. The for-profit sector is a sector I have not actually sat in. And I certainly don't have a crystal ball as to how our town is going to kind of grow and change as the outlets kind of cycle out and different things cycle in. But I think that if we don't tackle the housing question, I don't know that it matters what happens next. Nobody's going to be able to invest here if they can't have workers who can actually live here and work here.
Well, on that note, I guess we're going to have to leave it there for today. But boy, so we're sure a whole bunch more questions we could have asked. But I know we have to be on our way. So just want to thank you both again for making the time for this conversation. I think it's very helpful to our viewers and the voters in town to hear your views. I think this will be very interesting for all of them to listen to. So I want to thank Ivan Beattie, who's currently the chair of the Manchester Select Board, and Megan Amundson, who is currently a member of the Planning Commission, who is challenging Ivan for the 3-year seat on the Select Board. There's also a 2-year seat on the Select Board open. It's held by incumbent Jan Nolan, but she is running unopposed. So again, thank you both for making the time. Thank you to our viewers for being with us today. Hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Have a great day.